and you're good to go.
All right. Afternoon, everyone. So I thought I'd do a class on counteroffers. You know, a lot of people, I decided to do it because I noticed that listing agents were doing they were missing one important point. So I want to make sure that, I see you back there, Penny.
Not only did he see you, he knew you. He did.
Listing agents are missing one very important point. So I wanted to I thought, you know, what should I do? And I decided to do counteroffers. Okay, so you're representing the buyer and you've submitted an offer to the listing agent, and then that listing agent will respond most likely, unless you are a super duper great agent and the terms were so spectacular that they can do nothing but accept it as is, but most likely you're going to get a counteroffer. So the seller has two choices. The seller is the first to send the counteroffer, and the choices are dictated by, I'm sorry, I've got things up here that are messing me up. I can't see. Okay, it's dictated by whether the seller is countering one person or they're countering more than one person. So let's just say, which is probably unrealistic in this market, but let's just say they are countering just one person. So it's the seller counteroffer number one, and this would be to the purchase agreement, and then always put when the purchase agreement was dated. That's not when it was signed; it was when it was created, when it was dated, and all the property address and who the buyer and seller are going to be. So then we're going to get to this is what I want to point out for the listing agents. Paragraphs in the offer. I'm talking about the terms in 1A, paragraphs in the offer that require initials by all parties, but are not initialed by all parties, are excluded from the final agreement unless specifically referenced for inclusion in paragraph 1C of this or other counteroffer in the addendum. Why is that there? Well, in the original offer, there are two areas that are optional when you send it for your buyer to sign. And those two areas are liquidated damages and they are arbitration. They're purposely left optional because we can't dictate to the buyer whether to accept those two things. They're really important. Liquidated damages applies to the buyer should they default on the agreement. That means they've removed all their contingencies and then they still cancel. If it is owner occupied, the most that that the seller can get is 3%. That's liquidated damages. Arbitration is that if there is ever a disagreement about the contract, if there ever is a problem, it's in the contract that the first thing that happens is mediation. The second thing that happens, you could either go to court, have a full-on trial, or you can choose arbitration, and that is optional. So what this paragraph is saying is that if those aren't initialed, then they're not a part of it. So the first thing that you are going to do is you need to address that. So you address it that if the buyer didn't initial liquidated damages, then then you would counter that the buyer is to initial liquidated damages, and it is a part of this agreement. So I can type that for you if you want to see it in, but it'll take me time to type because I'm not a fast typer. Buyer is to initial and don't the liquidated. Okay. Spelling is.
While you're typing, we have a question from
Oh,
Mona.
sure. Go ahead.
Okay, Mona, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, hi, Rich. So let's
Hi.
say you were working with a buyer and they had contingencies. Let's say for inspection, they found mold. They don't want to proceed with the home anymore. So they back out of escrow and they signed for the liquidated damages. Now, in this case, because they had the contingencies, the seller has no course to take any percentage of the EMD. Is that correct?
No, they do. They're canceling because of item number 14B1, which is investigations, and they're backing out because of that. Buyers.
So liquidated damages only applies if somebody is trying to cancel without a contingency being in place. If there's a contingency being in
Yes.
place, then this doesn't really have an effect.
Right. They have. I will preface that with if the seller could always try to make an argument that the buyer isn't working in good faith, and that may be true. So remember, the buyer can cancel because of his inspections and cancel the agreement. But there's two things on that cancellation of contract. Number one is the cancellation. So the buyer can cancel as long as the buyer has a contingency, or if the seller has given a notice to perform and waited the correct amount of days, and then they can cancel. That contract is canceled. It's done. You don't need the other party to sign off on it. But what you do need the other party to sign off on it is section 2, which is what happens to the deposit. So if the buyer is canceling, then the buyer is you're gonna check the box that buyer cancels. Seller is to release the buyer's deposit, less any escrow fees, blah, 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 blah. And in order for that escrow to be closed and everybody moves on, both parties have to sign it.
And
But
that also leaves.
Yes, go ahead.
It also leads me to my next question. So we have the home inspection, we have the loan contingency, we have the appraisal, we have the seller's disclosure, and then you also have the seller notice to perform. So if the buyer is not responding, they're MIA, and they send the notice to perform, and the buyer doesn't respond, and they cancel escrow, they cannot hold you liable for the EMD. Is that correct? Should I repeat the question?
No, yeah, the seller can. Right, the seller can cancel and release the deposit back to the buyer. But once again, I say, you have these sellers who just think, well, I'm just not going to give them their deposit back. So I'm going to say they're not acting in good faith, and I'm going to take it to the next step. There are always those buyers and sellers, well, sellers really, who are going to do that. Now, are they successful? Most likely not. But anybody can initiate a lawsuit. Anybody can do that. We're in the most litigious state. That's why we have 16-page agreements as trying to avoid that. So, are they going to be successful? Probably not, but I can't say 100%, Mr. Buyer, your deposit is free and clear. That the seller's not gonna make a point about not acting in good faith. No, I can't say that, but it's doubtful that they would be successful. So that's what 1A is about, is that if that part is not initialed, then it doesn't become a part of it. And here's the second part of this, is what most listing agents don't do. And this is the reason why I decided to do this class. 1B says, unless otherwise agreed in writing, down payment and loan amounts will be adjusted in the same proportion as in the original offer. But here's the part that I need to stress to you. The deposit amount shall remain unchanged from the original offer. And listing agents aren't doing this right, because they don't put anything in the counteroffer to change that. You want 3%. So part of your counteroffer should be the earnest money deposit is to be 3% of the final purchase price. Because most likely the first thing that you're going to ask for is purchase price to be X, whatever it is, or best and final, whatever that is. So you want the purchase price, you want the deposit to be 3% of the final purchase price, and listing agents aren't doing that. And and technically, the deposit should be what's the original deposit was on the original offer, instead of 3% of the purchase price. So that's very, very important.
Quick
Yes.
comment.
Sure.
So I perfectly see where you're going with this and the importance of it. There have been times where I will see that the purchase price to be, best and final, or X, as you say, and then all other terms to remain the same. In that case, the earnest money would be remaining the same. Is that correct? You would not be adjusting it.
That's correct. And this paragraph B, that says it remains the same.
Got it.
Yeah. So you need to set, if you want to have 3% of the final purchase price, you need to write it in listing agents. You need to write it in the seller counteroffer. So it's really important.
Expect it to happen.
Correct.
Accordingly,
Yes.
It needs to be specified here as you'd like it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Really important. So what else would you put in the counteroffer? Well, most likely services have been left open-ended. Seller's choice in this, and seller's choice in the title company, seller's choice in escrow, seller's choice in natural hazard disclosure report. All that is the seller's choice. You should clarify that in this counteroffer. It has to be crystal clear to the escrow officer what this agreement is, what it's saying. So you would say, an escrow company to be Pacific Coastline, Sarah Handley, be as specific as you want. If you have a specific home warranty person that you want this to go to, you specify that in the counter. So that's really important to stress. So all the services would be here. If you wanted to shorten, inspection times, really important for inspection times. When Mona had her question, I said that inspection, the buyer would cancel under item 14B1. I see many people saying inspections to inspection period to be 5 days, or whatever they're shortening what the original one. Specify the item number, because a lot of times there are many different things that that are included in that inspection. It's not only the physical inspection of the property, it's also insurability, it's all these other things. So if you word it a certain way that you're only, property inspection to be, 5 days, you're only limiting the inspection part, the physical inspection part, to those 5 days. Everything else is what was originally, technically everything else is what was originally in the original offer. So that's why you want to say item 14B1 B1 to be 5 days. And you can, it would be nice to say what that item is about, is like, buyer investigations. I think that's what the title of it is, because a lot of people don't know what item 14B1, and they're always going to, oh, what is that, and they're referring back to the original contract. So that's be specific, as to what you're limiting. What else could you be, appraisal contingencies? No, either there is no appraisal contingency. All that would be the sellers, what would be available to the seller to counter. Now, I did want to talk about seller in possession. Say the seller wants to stay additional days. So you would write that in this counter, how many days, so, and the number of days are important. So say you're going to do 7 days after, and I want to, because you also need to tie, whenever there is a seller in possession, it always needs to include the corresponding CAR form relating to that seller in possession. So if it is 1 to 29 days, it's an SIP, seller in possession. If it is 30 days and beyond, it is an RLAS, residential lease after sale. And that's really important. And I'm going to show you why. I'm going to get out of this. Does anybody have questions on this before I get out of it?
Yes, just to rephrase, so anything longer than 30 days, it would be better to have a lease agreement. Anything less than that, you could just counter that in the seller offer.
Anything less than that, it would have a seller in possession. It's a different form. I'm going to show you the forms, but it doesn't have to, it has to have a residential lease after sale. It's a different form. So I'm going to show you the forms. So let's go here. This is, remember, it is 1 day to 29 days seller in possession. And notice that this is seller lease, seller license to remain in possession. You are not giving them a lease. You're giving them a license to remain on the property. And that's a really important differentiation. And that's why 30 days and more, it's a lease. So it's basically the terms as to how many days, how many calendar days after close, or a specific date, in consideration, how, what are they giving for them? It's either a dollar amount per day, and if it's a dollar amount, it would, or you can put the buyer's PITI. PITI is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. For condos, HOAs or HOA fees are tacked on there too. Late charges, if you want to charge late charges, most likely nobody's ever going to pay a late charge. A delivery possession fee, that's really important to buyers because they want to make sure that this person is going to get out when they say they're going to get out. And so they like to be able to hold some money in escrow. There's a thing to say it's held in escrow, so that we can hold some money and it will be released to the seller once it's confirmed that they're out. Utilities, it's important to say, who's paying the utilities. The seller should still pay their utilities. They're living there. Entry, this is really important. And this is important. This is a reason why to use this form is that it gains the buyer access. It makes very clear that the buyer still has access with 24 hours notice to the property because it is their property. Keys. This is in the RPA that the seller should provide at close of escrow. The seller needs to provide keys to the buyer at close of escrow. A lot of people, the seller thinks that they don't have to provide any keys, but they do. Even in the RPA, it states that the seller needs to provide keys and codes and all of that stuff. Can't be sublet, and the seller needs to keep insurance and all that. So this is, SIP is used from 1 to 29 days. Okay. Any questions on the SIP?
I do have a comment on the lease backs. Per the lender, typically in the past, I've been told, I just wanted to confirm with you, the lease back can go no longer than 59 days because then it becomes it's looked at as investment property after that. Is that still the case?
Most likely, yes. I mean, I know lenders who don't want to rent back more than 30 days because
Okay.
they don't want to establish that tenancy, and
Okay.
that's what 30 days does.
Okay.
But it depends on the lender. So
Okay, so clarify that with the lender.
right, exactly.
Sure.
Yes,
And then
the
the
buyer
other-
should clarify that. Yeah.
The other question, shoot. Now I lost my thought.
That's
Okay,
okay. I'll be here.
it's called Sometimers. Sometime I remember, sometime I don't.
Okay, so then
Rich, this
now
is-
we're gonna go to
Oh, somebody else is talking.
Hello, Rich. I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, this is Emilio. Good afternoon.
Hey.
So line number 2 under considerations, 2A, the money that's paid per day, that money goes into an escrow account? Is that?
It can, or it
Okay.
can be paid directly to the buyer. It's negotiable.
Okay.
Most likely it'll be held in, I mean, the safest way to do it is everything's held in escrow and it gets turned over to the buyer, when they vacate, all that.
So then we would have to check that box where it says or held in escrow?
Right, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, I remembered. So on the lease backs, I get this a lot from new agents, so I wanted to share it here. And then we have another question following mine, but on the lease backs, what about a walkthrough? So the seller is still in the house and we closed escrow. They're going to be there for another 30 days. How do we handle that walkthrough so that if something is damaged while they're in there, how do we address that? When do we do our walkthrough?
Okay. That's a good question because everybody says, oh, we're gonna do the final walkthrough the seller's living there for another 30 days, and then we're gonna do the final walkthrough prior to them moving out. No. The final the verification of property is in the contract to happen 5 days prior to close of escrow. And the purpose of it is, there's two purposes for the final verification. It's to make sure that the property is in the same condition as it was when you originally made the offer. And two, if there were any agreed upon repairs, then to ensure that those repairs were done. That's why if you're having sellers do repairs, then you want to make sure that those repairs are done, 5 days prior to when close of escrow is, because you want to confirm that they were done. I can't tell you how many buyer's agents do the final walkthrough on the day to close and things aren't done. And they call me and what do we do? There's nothing you can do at that point. You should have done it earlier. Your seller's only recourse right now is to sue the seller. I mean, your buyer's only recourse now is to sue the seller for the repairs that weren't done. That's unless you can come to some agreement. Okay, you were supposed to do this, hold some proceeds in escrow, and then once it's done, then you get that money back. But prior to having anybody agree to that, there's nothing to do. So that's the final walkthrough. It still needs to happen before close of escrow. What you're talking about is making sure that they didn't damage the property. That would be done at that time. Really, the agents are out of it. You've closed escrow, you've gotten your money. Your business is done. I know that we don't necessarily do that, but you're done from this transaction, really. But it can be arranged between the buyer and seller to do another walkthrough prior to them vacating, to make sure that nothing has been damaged. And that's why you want some money held in escrow in case they do damage it. It's like, hey, you damaged this, and I'm going to deduct. It's going to cost me this amount of money to do this, and I'm going to deduct. I'm going to deduct that amount from the money we're holding in escrow. I'm looking at this chat. Is clear to close from lender before the final walkthrough. Clear to close. I mean, it should be, because then it's going. Then you still have loan docs to get out. I mean, it should be. Yeah, most likely. It probably is before the final walkthrough. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question, Deborah. And there was some other questions. Yeah. Who had some other questions?
Julie, did your question get answered, or do you still have a question?
I still have a question. Thank you so much. Yeah, Rich, I was just wondering, what's the amount that would be held in escrow? Would it be the amount that is being charged for the length of time, plus maybe something of a deposit should some?
Correct.
Yeah,
whatever the days that they're going to be, escrow will figure it out for you as to how much that's going to go to the buyer for the rent back, and then tack on some for a deposit. Now, a seller's not going to like. A lot of sellers don't like to leave deposits. It's like, oh, it's my house, and I would argue that it's protecting. It's protecting the buyer's interest. I mean, he's got to know, number one, the horror stories of sellers not getting out when they were supposed to get out, and this is incentive to get them out. Hey, you lose this money, and if there are damages. So it's, if you're working with a buyer, try as much as you can to get a deposit from the seller. And then, like I said, for 30 days, it's residential lease after the sale. And this is a full-blown lease. It covers everything because we're talking about a lease. You know, it's 30 days plus. So it includes all the forms that go with the lease, you know, bed bugs and, you know, flood and all that stuff. So I don't have to go over the lease, but just make sure that you're using the right form. You know, if it's 0 to 29 days, it's the SIP. If it's 30 days plus, then it is the residential lease after sale. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. It went out of my head, Deborah. Okay. So the other one that the other counter for a seller would be the seller multiple offer. No, it's not seller. Multiple counter offer. Okay.
Mona, I see your hand is up. Do you have another question or it's just it stayed up? Oh, there it's gone. Okay, thank you.
So this is pretty much the same. This the multiple offer counter, and I get asked all the time. You know, the seller got you know, 4 offers. They only really want to counter one. Do they have to use the multiple offer because they got multiple? No. If you're only countering one, then you're only countering one. Just because you received multiple offers doesn't mean you have to use it. But if you did get a multiple multiple offers, you absolutely must use this form. Why must you use this form? Because it has this very, very special boxed. It's even boxed, number 8. This offer isn't accepted until the seller signs right here. It's not accepted until the seller signs here. I had an agent call me the other day saying, you know, we got a seller multiple counter. I'm representing the buyer. We got all the seller multiple. We accepted their terms and they sent it in, and crickets. I haven't heard. What's going on? What's going on? You know, we accepted everything. You know, do we have a deal? No, you don't have a deal, because until the seller signs this section right here, you know, saying that I have chosen this deal, you don't have a deal. So it's really important that this form is used, because what could happen if the seller uses the seller single part, you know, just the seller counter offer, and he does it with multiple buyers, that seller could be on the hook for selling the house to multiple different buyers. And guess what? Somebody's going to be disappointed and somebody's going to be sued, and you're going to be included if you're the listing agent. So it's really important to use the right forms. That's all everything else on this is the same. I just wanted to point out that you need to use this form in order to have that box that's finally accepted. So Julie, do you recommend like a 60-day escrow versus absolutely? I do. It's better to extend the escrow than to have the seller have the property, the ownership of the property turn over or compromise like 45 and 15, you know, 15. It's just like you're under the 30 days. It's only a few, you know, it's just I think it's cleaner. I know people want their money and all this stuff, but you know, it's I think it's a lot cleaner. So then the seller sends a counter, and then what happens? Either the buyer agrees, or then you have a buyer counter offer, and there is no buyer multiple counter offer because you, Mr. Buyer, is the only one.
I have another
So,
question, Rich.
oh,
from
go ahead.
Salima.
Yeah.
Salima, was it?
Yes. Hi, I just wanted to quickly ask if the listing agent sends out the seller multiple counteroffer, there's not really a proof, there's no real proof there's really been multiple counteroffers or multiple offers, correct?
No, there really isn't proof, but we're all held to an ethical, code of ethics, and you would think that somebody's going to be ethical, and if they say they have multiple offers, then they most likely do. If it is if they send you a multiple counter offer, and the buyer doesn't have to, that's the thing, the buyer doesn't have to change what their initial offer is. I've had many buyers say, they've been counter best and final. Well, that was my best and final. And it's like, okay, well, then we counter back the same price. So, that's just, I'm trying to think of what would really be the advantage. There's the sense of urgency that there's other offers. Yeah, I can see that.
Or for the price?
Well, for the price, but if, the buyer doesn't have to. Look, in this market, it has slowed down, but people were getting 15, 20 offers on a single property, and there still is an inventory issue with homes. So would I doubt that anybody got a multiple offer if it's a good enough house? Even crummy houses are going for in multiples, and people are clamoring to get it, paying ridiculous prices. So
50 over?
I'm sorry.
250,000 over, and
I've
still
seen
like,
it.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're paying, they're paying out of pocket because it doesn't appraise,
Right.
because they're removing their appraisal contingencies.
Well, I was in this situation, that's why I'm
Yeah.
asking. 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm wondering, and I have one more question. I'm
Sure,
sorry.
go ahead.
It was about the SIP. Now, if you didn't hold any money in escrow, and you have the SIP in place, and you do find damages after the final walkthrough, it's just small claims court. There's nothing
Yes.
else really.
There's nothing else really. Yeah. You just have to take them to small claim. That's why it's really important to have that first walkthrough prior to close of escrow, because then you know what the condition was, and you have a verification of property that that it was in the same condition, it was in an acceptable condition, whatever. And I say the property is in the same condition. I just had an agent call me and say, what happens when we haven't closed escrow and the place burned down? And that's happened. Yeah. And what happens is, it's a new material fact, and so the buyer has a chance to move out, to back out. But I think that the buyer wants to move forward, but the buyer wants the insurance money so that he can improve on it. So we'll see how that works out. But Mona, do you have another question?
Yes, I have two actually. So the first one is, how you were just talking about the lease pack and the seller in possession, and you said you'd rather have a longer escrow. So in your opinion, do you recommend having an escrow where it's contingent on the seller buying the second home doing versus a lease back or seller in possession?
Do I?
Or should I repeat the question? I may have been in.
Yeah, I'm confused, but
Okay, so let's say seller needs to stay, let's say you're selling your home and you need to buy another home before you leave because you won't have anywhere to go.
right.
Do you think it's better to make the escrow contingent on you buying your home instead of doing a lease back or seller in possession?
Always you should be making it contingent on, if that's your intention, is to find a new place and move into that new place, absolutely you need to make it contingent on finding a replacement property. Especially in this market, because there's no guarantee. You make a 60-day escrow that you're still gonna find something that's suitable for you in order to move out. Then what happens? It's after 60 days, then you have no place to go. Now you have to go get into a rental and maybe put things in storage. Absolutely. If that's the seller's intent, then that has to be a part of the agreement. And that's another thing that the listing agent can counter, is that, it's contingent on, the seller finding a replacement property.
And is this your recommendation, or is this just like if you're acting on behalf of the seller, giving them the best advice for them?
Well, it's your fiduciary duty to the seller to point out that if you're not making this contingent on you finding a replacement property, then you were deficient in your fiduciary duty, because there is that scenario where they make a 60-day escrow and they haven't found a place to live, and what are they supposed to do now?
100% agree.
Yeah.
My next question on top of that, but if you were working on behalf of the buyer and they had planned on renting the place, that would actually be a great scenario for you.
What do you mean?
Let's say I'm helping you buy a home and you want to rent the place out and the owners want to rent back. That would actually be a better scenario for you than doing the home contingent upon the seller buying their new home.
Yeah, but you're not going to get the rent that you're going from the seller that you're going to get from the next renter. You're not making money on the seller, really. You're probably, I mean, why would the seller agree to pay more than your PITI, which is what the loan is? You could try to negotiate for fair market value on the rent, absolutely, but especially in this market, I'd move on to the next buyer.
Okay,
You're trying to make money off of me? No, I'm not gonna do that.
Okay, just wanted to ask. My next question is, when you enter
I
escrow,
thought you said it too.
no, that was one part, Rich. If I
Okay.
have you here for the whole hour, I'm gonna
Here I said.
Okay. So when you're doing your Avid, you're doing your visual inspection to spot any like anything visible on the property. And then you have you said 5 days before close of escrows when you do the final walkthrough. So you match all the information on the Avid, right?
But no, the Avid is not for your final verification. No.
Because earlier you were speaking and you want to make sure that the property is in the same condition as you originally.
Right, it's the VP, it's the verification of property.
So 5 days before close of escrow, you use that document.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
So this is the buyer's counteroffer. It has the same language about initials and the same language about the deposit, and the buyer can counter what he doesn't like in the sellers, and if you have too many things, then you can, it produces an addendum. There was language. I thought there was language about that everything, in the original. Where was that language? So anyways, this would be a counteroffer to the seller counteroffer, or the seller multiple counteroffer. Here's a scenario and this reminded me that I didn't mention to you. You're the listing agent, and you're making a counter offer, just a regular counter offer to a buyer. In the meantime, you've sent that counter offer to the buyer. Okay, you haven't changed the default as to the expiration, and it's still 5 o'clock on the third day. And so in the meantime, say on day 2, or few hours after you send it, you get another offer. What do? You don't want, what you don't want, if this is better, or if this is, even if it isn't that much better, what you don't want is the buyer that you initially put the offer in to sign off on that and send it to you sight unseen without having a chance to get buyer number 2 involved. So what you do is, this is what reminded me, CAR form WOO, withdrawal of offer. You immediately send to that agent for buyer number 1 and say, I withdraw my seller counter offer number 1 and replace it with seller multiple counter offer number 1. So you are now telling the buyer that we're now in multiples. So that's an important note to make. So anything, I think that was, trying to think.
One more thing I would
Sure.
suggest, if you could share with them the numbering. So this one already says buyer number 1, but so many times agents will be like, well, what number is this? I'm sending this up and blah, 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 blah. So if you can explain
Right.
that, I think that would be
Yeah, I mean, it is, it can get a little confusing. Zip forms, I've noticed, is that they've pre-numbered them. So it gets confusing for listing agents if you're doing multiple counters, because then you just have to think of it logically. There's the first offer, so then it goes to the listing agent, so it's seller counter offer number 1, goes back to the buyer. The buyer wants to counter, it's buyer counter offer number 1. So you just have to follow then it goes back to the seller counter offer number 2. So it's just, you just have to like kind of logically think about it, starting with the purchase agreement, the original purchase agreement. Then we start from 1 on each side. So each side has a 1, and each side has a 2, and so on. Hopefully you don't get past 2. Anybody else have any other questions? Because I don't, I think that's probably it. Took a little longer than I even thought.
I actually do have a few questions, Rich.
Sure.
Okay. So my first thing is, I have a vague idea of what the 10301 exchange is. However, I am going to be helping a client soon who is going to be purchasing here and they're selling somewhere else. So I want to get more educated on it. And I was wondering if there is some sort of resource, like some kind of book or website, where I can get more information on the 10301 exchange.
Google.
Just
Google's a
Google?
great resource.
Okay.
And there is probably a lot of articles from the IRS about it, because it's a federal program.
Okay,
1031 exchange. Yeah.
IRS would have more knowledge on that. Okay, the second thing I wanted to ask you is, what does an agent exactly do differently in the 1031? I know there's a timeline to buy, if I'm not mistaken. Like after you sell, there's a timeline to buy the second home, so you reap the tax benefits. But as an agent, when you're helping someone, is there anything you do differently than normal transaction?
It all depends on who you're working with. If you're working with the person who's doing, if you're working with a buyer who's buying a house that is the seller is doing a 1031 exchange, it's basically the same transaction, because all you're doing is buying it, he's selling it. Now, for that seller, that agent has some work to do, because you've got 45 days to identify a new property. Most likely you're going to identify more than one property. You're working with a third party, a facilitator who is doing the kind of maneuvering and the paperwork. And so you've got to identify the properties within 45 days, and you've got to close on it within a total of 180 days
Because
in order to qualify.
because the clients, they're selling a home in Utah.
Right.
And they're
Doesn't matter where it is. Yeah, it doesn't matter
So
where it is.
there's nothing really I'm doing differently. I just need to coordinate with the listing agent on the other side to make sure the documents are being processed properly, or is that just all them? That's what they do.
That's all. That's them. You're working on the buyer. You're working with the buyer who the seller is doing the 1031. Is that what you're
So it's
saying?
no different than working with like a first-time home buyer
No.
looking for a home.
No, there may be some extra paperwork, and there may be some extra things that your buyer has to sign or to do, but it's at no cost to your buyer, and it's just a little extra, probably an extra step.
So
Yeah.
if I have a transaction coordinator and they're helping me, they would be able to coordinate all that proper paperwork.
Yeah, they
Okay, I'm
should.
gonna have-
I mean, it comes from escrow. I mean, it's not additional paperwork that the brokerage supplies. It's an escrow deal, because the escrow is working with the facilitator.
Okay, and then I have two more questions that are much easier to answer.
Okay, well, I'll be the judge of that. Okay.
Okay, I know we cannot tell people like, oh, this is a bad area, or oh, this is a good area, but
Right.
let's say you're telling somebody, oh, this part of the town is more affluent or it's more high end. Is this appropriate verbiage?
No, it's still not appropriate.
Because like, for example, Simi Valley, there's Country Club Drive, like the country club area, and it's more affluent. But how can you say this in a way that it's not really like a violation?
Houses are more expensive here. I mean, that says it. That says it.
Okay.
Take a drive around the neighborhood. Look at the area within this neighborhood that you like. That's putting the onus on the buyer. You're not steering. You remember your real estate classes. You're
Yeah,
not
you can't
steering
steer
people
a certain area.
to a specific area. You are telling them to do their own due diligence. But you can state the fact that something is more expensive in this area than it is in that. You're going to pay more money.
Okay, and my last
Clue.
and final question.
Okay.
So if you're a broker of West Side and we do an open house for a West Side listing, are we still covered under the E&O or no?
No,
I think I
they're
asked that
separate corporations. No, separate corporation. That's why we can't share excluded listings. Somebody who has an excluded listing in Coastal can't share it with Calabasas, can't share it with West Side, even though I'm the broker of all those offices, because they're different corporations, different DRE numbers.
So Rich, since we have a real nice attendance here, a captive audience, they're here to learn. Can you reiterate no open houses for other offices, other companies, and the reason why?
Okay. I can't tell you not to do an open house for another company or another brokerage or another office. But what I can tell you is that should you do, if you're doing an open house at a company or at a brokerage that is not your brokerage, then you will not be covered under our E&O insurance or our personal liability insurance should something happen. I had an agent who did an open house, while he was in the open house, the toilet overflowed. The homeowners took him to small claims court. You know, he wasn't covered under any of our things. I mean, it wasn't his fault either. This happened prior to him arriving, and he's the one who discovered it. And luckily, he had the sense to, okay, he took video. He took, you know, he showed stuff, and we went to small claims court, and we were triumphant, or whatever you want to call it. But it could have gone the other way. You never know. Small claims court is a crapshoot. So
hey, Rich, so okay, so basically if don't reach out to other agents from other brokerages to do open houses. Basically, that's what you're saying, because you're not insured.
correct. That's what I would advise. You guys aren't employees of mine. You're independent contractors. You make your own decisions on how you run your business. I can only advise you that should you, and I know that open houses are, you know, they're tough to get, but if you can't find one within your brokerage and you go outside of your brokerage, then you will not be covered under our policy, our E&O policy, or our personal liability policy.
All right. Because I've been doing open houses for other people, agents, and now that this, I'm not doing it no more. So just to protect myself.
It's some people are willing to take the risk. You know, that's a personal decision that I can't make for you. All right.
Guys, we have time for one more question. Do we have anybody else?
I see, Joanne, I see your hand up.
Joanne,
Yeah, I have a question, because I'm kind of confused, because I did do an open house in Westminster for an agent that was in the West Side office, and you're the broker for West Side office. So,
But you're not an agent of the West Side office.
okay, so I should not have done that, the open house.
No.
Well, anyway, everything went well. So
Sure. I mean,
Well, I
it's
didn't-
I mean, how often does something happen? But I say that, but it has happened. And there was an agent in one of my other offices that somebody hit their head or something, and they were trying to go after the brokerage. I mean, things happen. In that instance, it was excuse me, it's in the listing agreement that the seller is responsible for personal injury and all that. They have to have that insurance. So the seller was saying, I'm not going to pay it. The agents were having the open house, so we're still fighting with that seller to cough up, because it's in the listing agreement. It's not our responsibility. But my point is that things do happen, and you just wouldn't be covered if you're not doing it for an agent in the office that you are in. Okay.
all right, that clarifies it.
Okay. All right. Anything else you wanted me to clarify, Deborah?
no, I think we're good. I just thought we had a really good attendance here today. Thank you all for joining. It's been awesome. A lot of great information as always with Rich. So make sure to watch for his classes. I think we have 2 a month, right, Rich? Every other
Yes.
Wednesday, we try to have them.
Yes.
At the same time, 4 o'clock. So definitely tune in and come armed with questions.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everybody.